as Jesus continues his teachings on wholeness and completeness in the greater righteousness of the kingdom of God, he next moves his focus to teaching us what it means to have piety in those areas. So this is the Sermon on the Mount and piety. As we move on to our next section of the Sermon on the Mount, it still remains concerned with the greater righteousness, with the idea of what does it mean to be whole or complete in God. But the topic shifts a little bit, and it's shifted by the inclusion of a verse that starts off the next section, and this is that verse. Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So today we're just going to break that verse down into 3 separate items to just see what this tells us about the coming verses we're going to be looking at in the other sessions this week. So the first thing it tells us is that the focus of this is about piety. What is piety? Piety is essentially acts of devotion towards God. It's those things we do that show our devotion to God. In the Christian world, it would be prayer, fasting, almsgiving, and those are the 3 examples the text is going to look at a lot. But it would also cover things like taking communion, going to worship, and other things that we do that show our devotion to God. They show our love of God. Now, what this verse and the following section really seem concerned about is, are you truly doing that piety as devotion to God? Or is your focus more on what other human beings think about? Are you doing it in order to be seen as pious, in order to be seen as good? In short, is your piety about your devotion to God, or is it about you looking good to other humans? Is it about you loving God, or is it about trying to get other humans to think you are a great and wonderful person? It's a very stark warning that's really important. I'll put a side note in here. For a while I worked with domestic violence situations. One of the things I discovered there is that batterers, abusers, really like to go to churches to make themselves look good and innocent and above suspicion. They really like to make themselves go to church so that other people think them good. They're not here because of their piousness. They're not here because they love God. They're here because of the empty attempt to try and get other people to think them good, to cover up their crimes. So there's a little bit of how this can actually really play into some serious situations in the modern world. And this kind of concern that people are doing their piety because they love God and not because they want others to love them is kind of the focus of this next little section. The third point in this verse is the reason as to why Jesus and Matthew are so concerned with this issue. Because it says, if you're doing this for your own gain, for other people to look good for you, there is no reward. When we understand that in the concept of the sermon, what does that mean? Well, it means there is no completeness. There is no wholeness. So there is no flourishing, no makariousness. There is no entering the kingdom of heaven. So what is at stake is cosmic for us in scale. This is why these points make it into the sermon. And when you think about it, the idea of putting yourself and what others think of you above and beyond your love and devotion for God is the very opposite of what greater righteousness, of what wholeness, completeness, flourishing in the kingdom of God is all about. Because when we're flourishing, when we're embracing wholeness, completeness, We're embracing love of God and love of others. But when a love of God is abused to become about creating a good picture of ourselves to others, no longer is it about loving God, it's about loving me. No longer is it about loving them, it's about loving me. The direction is completely the opposite to wholeness. The me is the complete antithesis of God in you. That's what it's all about. So this is why how piety is practiced is so important. And I want you to understand this as a last point. This passage is not saying piety is bad. In fact, the whole point of piety is to show devotion and love of God and should be encouraged. Prayer, almsgiving, fasting, communion, worship, they should all be encouraged as acts of devotion to God. But when they are abused to become about making the individual look good, they are worthless.